Hey, welcome to this week's episode of The Green Room. Hopefully you guys have subscribed on YouTube and are following us each week. But today I am super excited because today on the panel we have a small group. So let's give these guys a hand. One of the things these guys have been unpacking the green room each week in their group, and so they said, "Hey, we'd like to be a part of that panel." So they're jumping in today. They got a lot of questions for us, and we're going to be drilling down with Pastor Brian in this hour or so.
Looking forward to it. We just finished doing a bunch of baptisms, so I'm looking forward to being able to unpack some questions regarding baptism. And it actually is one of the longer segments in our first base class. So I do know people have a lot of questions in this area. So let's see what we got.
All right.
So one of the questions that came in, it's a two-part question. It says, can a person be baptized more than once? Is there a limit how many times you can be baptized?
Well, I think that's a good question. Well, first of all, you could be. I mean, you could be baptized every day if you just, find a new church every week. But, the question is, what does the Bible say about, the sequences of baptism? And for baptism, Jesus in John 3 gives a great illustration. When he's talking to Nicodemus at night, and he talks about salvation being like new birth. And so Jesus there gives an illustration of the water representing that physical birth. He says when the water, appears, that new life is about to occur. And so Jesus is giving the analogy that your salvation is like physical birth. So you're born once physically, and you're born again once spiritually. And so the baptism represents that new birth experience. So we wouldn't really want to say, well, I got born again. That's a stuck record. So the baptism should represent that act of salvation. That's what it should do. But you and I
think that's because people backslide and they feel like, well, I've backslid and I need to show the world again that I've come back to Christ. And so they think they need to be baptized again. They don't realize that once they've gone down,
that's so awesome. Now I've heard that some people baptize or backslide. I haven't personally ever done that. Okay, I mean,
saw your Facebook post.
Well, I mean, in the last 2 seconds, I have. No, I did. I backslid by lying. Okay, so yes, I think that's absolutely 100%, 1,000%. I know I did that in my life, and I remember when I recommitted my life to Christ. I think I've shared before that moment of recommitment and coming back to God after a long period of being away from God was as substantial and significant of a spiritual moment for me as my initial salvation. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I should get baptized to celebrate that and really show God I really mean it. But the truth is I was reaffirming. And so, one of the questions I ask in first base is, number one, theologically, all Christians backslide, just to different degrees and for different durations. So we all backslide. We all mess up and fall away and have seasons where we're in and out. I think the difficulty becomes where, if you backslide, for 2 years, is that maybe you weren't a Christian? Or maybe 4 years? How about 20? And the good news is, thank God, that God never put in the Bible some measuring stick, because let God be the judge.
Yes.
Let God figure it out.
Yes.
And so I would say if you had a genuine born-again experience and you've been baptized by immersion, following that as a statement of your faith, then you've been baptized. You're as baptized as you need to be. And recommitment after backsliding, the recommitment. Really, the best way to show God that you're really serious this time is to actually be serious this time, and to really good. It's sort of like with my kids. It's like sometimes when they're little, they say, oh, they do something wrong. I'm so sorry. Well, you ever had a kid that did that like 10 or 20 times about the same thing? You're like, okay, I don't need you to cry anymore. I just need you to do it. So at the end of the day, you show God that you're serious by living it. So. I believe that baptism is a one-time act, but that makes it more confusing, because what if I got baptized when I was, 2 years old, or I got baptized, when I was 10 years old, but I didn't really get saved then? And I think that confuses a lot of people too, because they're like, oh, well then can I get rebaptized? Well, actually, you haven't actually been baptized, because what you did is you just got religiously wet. Baptism is only believer's baptism when it represents that you've been converted. So if it was done as a child or as a baby, then that was somebody else's faith, not yours. And for us, it needs to be following the time that you made a decision. So people confuse it, and I always clear the air with people by doing this. I'll just say, hey, let's not talk about baptism, Linda. Let me just ask you a quick question. Tell me when you fully trusted Christ and you knew for sure. Oh, Pastor Brian, I did that when I was 21. Okay, good. Let's mark that. Have you been baptized scripturally since 21? No, I got baptized at 11. Okay, this is a no-brainer. You need to be scripturally baptized because you haven't been baptized since you believed. So I don't know if that helps, but.
It does.
One of the other questions that came in, and it actually is talking about the method, was I was a believer, but I was not fully immersed. And so what does that look like? And some of us that may have happened with us. We were baptized in a different religious experience. We were already a Christian, already a believer, but it was not by immersion.
Yeah, super good question, because I do know a lot of folks. My heritage, my father and grandfather grew up in Methodist heritage in the old days. Remember the old revivals and stuff, and got saved through those experiences. And back then they were baptizing, by pouring over water over the person. They'd lift down their head or something. And sometimes they even did infant baptisms. So depending on which Methodist church, but I think there's definitely people who would say, I really did get saved, and then I really did get baptized, but the baptism was not by immersion following that. And my encouragement is to do it the way Jesus did. If the idea is to be a Jesus follower, then I want to imitate what Jesus did. And we know for a fact that Jesus was baptized by immersion because the Greek word and the language there, the Greek word is a transliteration. It's literally baptizo in the Greek, and it's just a transliteration to English. So if most words, when you translate a word, you translate in a clear statement. Like if you're translating Spanish, hola, you wouldn't say, and the word is hola. You would actually say hello, right? So, but unfortunately, they translate it as a transliteration and translate it to baptize and use that word. I think if it had been fair, they would have said immerse, because the Greek word baptizo means to fully submerse. So the question is, why wouldn't you want to go ahead and do it the way the Bible says? Yeah. So,
cool.
Other questions?
All right.
Here we go.
On the spot, Linda.
Yes.
Don't blow it.
If baptism is a public statement, please explain the validity of the baptism of the eunuch by Philip. Excuse me.
The fidelity? Say it again.
The validity.
The validity.
Oh, the validity. Okay.
Yeah.
So say the whole question again. Why?
If baptism is a public statement,
Yes.
please explain the validity of baptism of the eunuch by Philip.
Okay, I think I know what's happening here. They're thinking that was private. And when I shared that message out of Acts chapter 8, we only read about the interaction with Philip and the eunuch, but what we know historically, contextually, is that it was a part of a caravan. He was an extremely wealthy guy. He was riding in a carriage. He was the treasurer, and the roads were not fully guarded. So that would have been about between 60 and 80 people that were traveling together with him. So he actually did a public profession. He did it in fact, he did it the best way. He did it with the people who knew him best. So he did it with his posse, and so he actually did it there with them. So it was definitely a public profession. So it's not about the number of people. So for example, if you were in a small group and one of your group members said, I need to do that, and you had a discussion, you had to pull out back, go get it done.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because you're with your posse.
Yeah.
No, we're not doing that.
Now, you want to make sure the pool is heated.
We're not doing it.
We might actually run out to Pastor Gordon's house, because I happen to know yours is heated.
he's
All right.
got
So, but that's the real.
That's
the
really
point
cool.
of it is it's the profession. I wouldn't get all legalistic about it. The point is that I'm publicly stating this. I'm not trying to hide this.
Right. It's not about the quantity of people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or even the quality.
Well, I just think it's.
Oh!
Okay.
Yeah, even if you did it with Baptists, it's still good, okay?
I think he's saying something about our group.
No, me.
One of the things I've heard you say in the past, it connects you with him, and it also connects you with them.
Yeah.
And I told folks when they take that step and get baptized, don't be surprised if someone doesn't come to you after the service and say, your story touched me, or I can relate, and they take that step of faith as a result. Yeah. God just has a tendency to bless when you take a step of faith and it impacts others. So I would just say, man, the more the merrier. I know it's a huge, man, I remember back in my baptism, I sat on the fence for several months before the person, that was in Stacy's role now, called me and says, hey, when are we going to get that done? And as a result of getting that done that day, I had a gentleman come up to me and say that, and he got baptized a few weeks later. So it's just cool how God works.
Yeah.
Man, I was scared to death going in that tub, but man, I like to tell people, I've never seen someone come up out of that tub that has ever regret taking that step of faith. It's just huge. It's a defining moment in our faith.
I'm glad you said that because we were in share class yesterday and talking about how to share your faith. And the greatest first way you share your faith with people who need to hear about Jesus is baptism. There's not a better way. And when you do that, you're immediately given a context to tell your friends and family members, I've made a decision for Christ. And I think it's the most convenient. I love giving folks an opportunity like some cards or something, invite your family, invite your friends, because this is a witnessing tool. So when we say public profession of faith, we really mean you're witnessing. You're being a witness. And that happened this morning. We had I think it was 2 that were scheduled for the second service, and we ended up baptizing 14. Now that statement of those folks who said, okay, I'm scared to death.
Oh, man. Yeah.
I'm really terrified to take this step, but I love Jesus and I haven't done that. It gave them the courage by seeing others take that step. Gave them the courage. What a powerful, powerful witness. So, very cool.
The other
It may
thing,
be off track, but when you said courage in your sermon, you said anyone who has courage has had fear. I thought that is so important to recognize, especially I teach that children realize that you're going to be fearful. For the longest time, I thought the Bible was perfect people.
Yeah.
And then, thanks to you and your wonderful teaching, it's riddled with faulted people, and they were fearful, but they had the courage to step out. And that just kind of touched me when you said that if you have courage, you had to have had fear. You're crazy if you don't have fear and you're walking in your everyday life.
Plus, I modeled for you what it is to have a faulted pastor. It's not just the people in the Bible.
Yes, that's encouraging.
I remember several examples where we had some folks on a Sunday like today, we were doing baptisms, and they were believers for decades. They had just never taken that step. And man, God spoke to them that morning and said, man, you just need to get baptized this morning. Didn't make them lesser than a Christian. They were just fulfilling a spiritual step that they had never taken. And several of them were sprinkled or whatever like that, and they just needed to be baptized by immersion. And man, that was courageous. I was thinking, how awesome is it to where they heard it clearly delivered in a message that morning, and they took that step of faith. And as a result, I know it impacted others that were probably at that same situation. Huge.
Yeah. The last time I used the same outline I'd preached, I think it was about 5 years ago, and I think that's when your son-in-law actually took that step. And I was thinking about him actually this morning when I was doing message prep. So as I'm praying before the message, I'm thinking of who is out there right now that needs this message so desperately, and allow the Holy Spirit to do what He does best, move in hearts and lives, because He's the only one that can bring about real spiritual fruit. So, any other thoughts or questions before we close up?
Sure.
My question was so baptism has pretty much taken the place of circumcision, because for an Israelite to be part of God's kingdom, he had to be circumcised, whereas now in Christ's kingdom, following Christ, that's kind of taken that place of being that public display.
Yeah, that's a great observation. Now theologians would they probably would haggle over some of the dynamics of it and the differences, but there's certainly far more similarities, and the New Testament does clearly give an analogy about circumcision to baptism. But the most important thing is the symbology that it represents. And frankly, if I had to choose between being circumcised and baptized, I know which one I'm going for as a man. So
Take me to the water.
So, and the beautiful thing is that in the Old Testament, the covenant of circumcision was reserved for the man, and he represented the head of household in that covenant promise. But Jesus opened the gates and said, no, men and women are equal before God. And so that's why baptism is such a cool marker that it puts us all on level ground at the cross. So really, really cool. Good stuff. Anything else? Nothing else to do but get baptized.
Yeah, well, one of the cool things, you may be unpacking this in your group. You may be unpacking this on, I was talking to someone last week. They listened to it on their commute to work. I was like, man, how cool is that? You may be on the treadmill at the gym listening to this podcast. If you're at that place where you need to take a step of baptism, I would encourage you to get up with us. You can call us here at the church office, or you can email us during the week. And we would love to help you take that step of faith. Thank you so much for tuning in each week. And
I think this
TB?
would be cool. In your group, as you're watching us, in your group, tell your story of baptism.
Yeah.
Just go around and share your story of baptism. I know mine's
cool.
a little bit unique, so I'll save it for my group. But there's some interesting points about that in my baptism experience. But share your story. I think it'd be a cool way to start the group.
Very cool.
All right, we'll see you next time.
All right.
Thank you so much, panel.